Section 22 of On Benefits. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. On Benefits by Seneca. Translated by Aubrey Stewart. Book 7, Chapters 1 to 7. Book 7, Chapter 1. Be of good cheer, my liberalis. Our port is close, and I will not delay, nor by digressions wander from the way. This book collects together all that has been omitted, and in it, having exhausted my subject, I shall consider not what I am to say, but what there is which I have not yet said. If there be anything superfluous in it, I pray you take it in good part, since it is for you that it is superfluous. Had I wished to set off my work to the best advantage, I ought to have added to it by degrees, and to have kept for the last that part which would be eagerly perused even by a sated reader. However, instead of this, I have collected together all that was essential in the beginning. I am now collecting together whatever then escaped me. Nor, by Hercules, if you ask me, do I think that, after the rules which govern our conduct have been stated, it is very much to the purpose to discuss the other questions which have been raised more for the exercise of our intellects than for the health of our minds. The cynic Demetrius, who, in my opinion, was a great man, even if compared with the greatest philosophers, had an admirable saying about this, that one gained more by having a few wise precepts ready and in common use than by learning many without having them at hand. The best wrestler, he would say, is not he who has learned thoroughly all the tricks and twists of the art, which are seldom met with in actual wrestling, but he who has well and carefully trained himself in one or two of them, and watches keenly for an opportunity of practicing them. It does not matter how many of them he knows, if he knows enough to give him the victory. And so in this subject of ours there are many points of interest, but few of importance. You need not know what is the system of the ocean tides, why each 7th year leaves its mark upon the human body, why the more distant parts of a long portico do not keep their true proportion, but seem to approach one another until at last the spaces between the columns disappear, how it can be that twins are conceived separately, though they are born together, whether both result from one, or each from a separate act, why those whose birth was the same should have such different fates in life, and dwell at the greatest possible distance from one another, although they were born touching one another. It will not do you much harm to pass over matters which we are not permitted to know, and which we should not profit by knowing. Truths so obscure may be neglected with impunity. Footnote: the old saying, "Truth lurks deep in a well," or abyss. End footnote. Nor can we complain that nature deals hardly with us, for there is nothing which is hard to discover except those things by which we gain nothing beyond the credit of having discovered them. Whatever things tend to make us better or happier are either obvious or easily discovered. Your mind can rise superior to the accidents of life, if it can raise itself above fears and not greedily covet boundless wealth, but has learned to seek for riches within itself, if it has cast out the fear of men and gods, and has learned that it has not much to fear from man, and nothing to fear from God. If by scorning all those things which make life miserable while they adorn it, the mind can soar to such a height as to see clearly that death cannot be the beginning of any trouble, though it is the end of many. If it can dedicate itself to righteousness, and think any path easy which leads to it, if, being a gregarious creature and born for the common good, it regards the world as the universal home, if it keeps its conscience clear towards God, and lives always as though in public, fearing itself more than other men, then it avoids all storms, it stands on firm ground in fair daylight, and has brought to perfection its knowledge of all that is useful and essential. All that remains serves merely to amuse our leisure. Yet, when once anchored in safety, the mind may consider these matters also, though it can derive no strength, but only culture from their discussion. Chapter 2. The above are the rules which my friend Demetrius bids him, who would make progress in philosophy, to clutch with both hands, never to let go, but to cling to them, and make them a part of himself, and by daily meditation upon them, to bring himself into such a state of mind that these wholesome maxims occur to him of their own accord, that wherever he may be, they may straightway be ready for use when required, and that the criterion of right and wrong may present itself to him without delay. Let him know that nothing is evil except what is base, and nothing good except what is honorable. Let him guide his life by this rule. Let him both act and expect others to act in accordance with this law, and let him regard those whose minds are steeped in indolence, and who are given up to lust and gluttony, as the most pitiable of mankind, no matter how splendid their fortunes may be. Let him say to himself, pleasure is uncertain, short, apt to pall upon us, and the more eagerly we indulge in it, the sooner we bring on a reaction of feeling against it. We must necessarily afterwards blush for it, or be sorry for it. There is nothing grand about it, nothing worthy of man's nature, little lower as it is than that of the gods. Pleasure is a low act, brought about by the agency of our inferior and baser members, and shameful in its result. True pleasure, worthy of a human being and of a man, is not to stuff or swell his body with food and drink, nor to excite lusts which are least hurtful when they are most quiet, but to be free from all forms of mental disturbance, both those which arise from men's ambitious struggles with one another, and those which come from on high and are more difficult to deal with, which flow from our taking the traditional view of the gods and estimating them by the analogy of our own vices. This equable, secure, uncloying pleasure is enjoyed by the man now described, a man skilled, so to say, in the laws of gods and men alike. Such a man enjoys the present without anxiety for the future, for he who depends upon what is uncertain can rely confidently upon nothing. Thus he is free from all those great troubles which unhinge the mind. He neither hopes for nor covets anything, and engages in no uncertain adventures, being satisfied with what he has. Do not suppose that he is satisfied with a little, for everything is his, and that not in the sense in which all was Alexander's, who, though he reached the shore of the Red Sea, yet wanted more territory than that through which he had come. He did not even own those countries which he had held or had conquered, while Onesicritus, whom he had sent on before him to discover new countries, was wandering about the ocean and engaging in war in unknown seas. Is it clear that he who pushed his armies beyond the bounds of the universe, who with reckless greed dashed headlong into a boundless and unexplored sea, must in reality have been full of wants? It matters not how many kingdoms he may have seized or given away, or how great a part of the world may pay him tribute. Such a man must be in need of as much as he desires. Chapter 3. This was not the vice of Alexander alone, who followed with a fortunate audacity in the footsteps of Bacchus and Hercules, but it is common to all those whose covetousness is whetted rather than appeased by good fortune. Look at Cyrus and Cambyses and all the royal house of Persia. Can you find one among them who thought his empire large enough, or was not at the last gasp still aspiring after further conquests? We need not wonder at this, for whatever is obtained by covetousness is simply swallowed up and lost, nor does it matter how much is poured into its insatiable maw. Only the wise man possesses everything without having to struggle to retain it. He alone does not need to send ambassadors across the seas, measure out camps upon hostile shores, place garrisons in commanding forts, or maneuver legions and squadrons of cavalry. Like the immortal gods, who govern their realm without recourse to arms, and from their serene and lofty heights protect their own, so the wise man fulfills his duties, however far-reaching they may be, without disorder, and looks down upon the whole human race, because he himself is the greatest and most powerful member thereof. You may laugh at him, but if you in your mind survey the east and the west, reaching even to the regions separated from us by vast wildernesses, if you think of all the creatures of the earth, all the riches which the bounty of nature lavishes, it shows a great spirit to be able to say, as though you were a god, all these are mine. Thus it is that he covets nothing, For there is nothing which is not contained in everything, and everything is his. Chapter 4. This, say you, is the very thing that I wanted. I have caught you. I shall be glad to see how you will extricate yourself from the toils into which you have fallen of your own accord. Tell me, if the wise man possesses everything, how can one give anything to a wise man? For even what you give him is his already. It is impossible, therefore, to bestow a benefit upon a wise man, if whatever is given him comes from his own store. Yet you Stoics declare that it is possible to give to a wise man. I make the same inquiry about friends as well. For you say that friends own everything in common, and if so, no one can give anything to his friend, for he gives what his friend owned already in common with himself. There is nothing to prevent a thing belonging to a wise man, and yet being the property of its legal owner. According to law, everything in a state belongs to the king, yet all that property over which the king has rights of possession is parceled out among individual owners, and each separate thing belongs to somebody. And so one can give the king a house, a slave, or a sum of money without being said to give him what was his already, for the king has rights over all these things, while each citizen has the ownership of them. We speak of the country of the Athenians, or of the Campanians, though the inhabitants divide them amongst themselves into separate estates. The whole region belongs to one state or another, but each part of it belongs to its own individual proprietor, so that we are able to give our lands to the state, although they are reckoned as belonging to the state, because we and the state own them in different ways. Can there be any doubt that all the private savings of a slave belong to his master as well as he himself? Yet he makes his master presents. The slave does not therefore possess nothing, because if his master chose, he might possess nothing, nor does what he gives of his own free will cease to be a present, because it might have been wrung from him against his will. As for how we are to prove that the wise man possesses all things, we shall see afterwards. For the present, we are both agreed to regard this as true. We must gather together something to answer the question before us, which is, how any means remain of acting generously towards one who already possesses all things? All things that a son has belong to his father, yet who does not know that in spite of this a son can make presents to his father? All things belong to the gods, yet we make presents and bestow alms even upon the gods. What I have is not necessarily not mine because it belongs to you, for the same thing may belong both to me and to you. He to whom courtesans belong, argues our adversary, must be a procurer. Now courtesans are included in all things, therefore courtesans belong to the wise man. But he to whom courtesans belong is a procurer, therefore the wise man is a procurer. Yes, by the same reasoning, our opponents would forbid him to buy anything, arguing, no man buys his own property. Now, all things are the property of the wise man, therefore the wise man buys nothing. By the same reasoning, they object to his borrowing, because no one pays interest for the use of his own money. They raise endless quibbles, although they perfectly well understand what we say. Chapter 5. For when I say that the wise man possesses everything, I mean that he does so without thereby impairing each man's individual rights in his own property, in the same way as in a country ruled by a good king, everything belongs to the king by the right of his authority, and to the people by their several rights of ownership. This I shall prove in its proper place. In the meantime, it is a sufficient answer to the question to declare that I am able to give to the wise man that which is in one way mine, and in another way his. Nor is it strange that I should be able to give anything to one who possesses everything. Suppose I have hired a house from you. Some part of that house is mine, some is yours. The house itself is yours. The use of your house belongs to me. Crops may ripen upon your land, but you cannot touch them against the will of your tenant. And if corn be dear, or at famine price, you will, in vain another's mighty store behold, grown upon your land, lying upon your land, and to be deposited in your own barns. Though you be the landlord, you must not enter my hired house, nor may you take away your own slave from me if I have contracted for his services. Nay, if I hire a carriage from you, I bestow a benefit by allowing you to take your seat in it, although it is your own. You see, therefore, that it is possible for a man to receive a present by accepting what is his own. Chapter 6. In all the cases which I have mentioned, each party is the owner of the same thing. How is this? It is because the one owns the thing, the other owns the use of the thing. We speak of the books of Cicero. Doris, the bookseller, calls these same books his own. The one claims them because he wrote them, the other because he bought them, so that they may quite correctly be spoken of as belonging to either of the two, for they do belong to each, though in a different manner. Thus Titus Livius may receive as a present, or may buy his own books from Doris. Although the wise man possesses everything, yet I can give him what I individually possess. For though, king-like, he in his mind possesses everything, yet the ownership of all things is divided among various individuals, so that he can both receive a present and owe one, can buy or hire things. Everything belongs to Caesar, yet he has no private property beyond his own privy purse. As emperor, all things are his, but nothing is his own except what he inherits. It is possible, without treason, to discuss what is and what is not his, for even what the court may decide not to be his, from another point of view, is his. In the same way, the wise man in his mind possesses everything. In actual right and ownership, he possesses only his own property. Chapter 7. Bion is able to prove by argument at one time that everyone is sacrilegious, at another that no one is. When he is in a mood for casting all men down the Tarpeian rock, he says, "Whosoever touches that which belongs to the gods, and consumes it or converts it to his own uses, is sacrilegious. But all things belong to the gods, so that whatever thing anyone touches belongs to them to whom all belongs. Whoever, therefore, touches anything is sacrilegious." Again, when he bids men break open temples and pillage the capital without fear of the wrath of heaven, he declares that no one can be sacrilegious, because whatever a man takes away, he takes from one place which belongs to the gods into another place which belongs to the gods. The answer to this is that all places do indeed belong to the gods, but all are not consecrated to them, and that sacrilege can only be done in places solemnly dedicated to heaven. Thus, also, the whole world is a temple of the immortal gods, and indeed the only one worthy of their greatness and splendor. And yet there is a distinction between things sacred and profane. All things which it is lawful to do under the sky and the stars are not lawful to do within consecrated walls. The sacrilegious man cannot do God any harm, for he is placed beyond his reach by his divine nature. Yet he is punished because he seems to have done him harm. His punishment is demanded by our feeling on the matter, and even by his own. In the same way, therefore, as he who carries off any sacred things is regarded as sacrilegious, although that which he stole is nevertheless within the limits of the world, so it is possible to steal from a wise man. For in that case it will be some, not of that universe which he possesses, but some of those things of which he is the acknowledged owner, and which are severally his own property, which will be stolen from him. The former of these possessions he will recognize as his own. The latter he will be unwilling, even if he be able to possess. He will say, as that Roman commander said, when, to reward his courage and good service to the state, he was assigned as much land as he could enclose in one day's plowing. "You do not," said he, "want a citizen who wants more than is enough for one citizen. Do you not think that it required a much greater man to refuse this reward than to earn it? For many have taken away the landmarks of other men's property, but no one sets up limits to his own." End of section 22. Recorded by John Pederson.
Section 23 of On Benefits. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by SKwanlada. On Benefits by Seneca. Translated by Aubrey Stewart. Book 7, Chapters 8 to 16. Chapter 8. When then we consider that the mind of the truly wise man has the power over all things and pervades all things, we cannot help declaring that everything is his, although in the estimation of our common law it may chance that he may be rated as possessing no property whatever. It makes a great difference whether we estimate what he owns by the greatness of his mind or by the public register. He would pray to be delivered from that possession of everything of which you speak. I will not remind you of Socrates, Chrysippus, Zeno, and other great men, all the greater, however, because envy prevents no one from praising the ancients. But a short time ago I mentioned Demetrius, who seems to have been placed by nature in our times, that he might prove that we could neither corrupt him nor be corrected by him. A man of consummate wisdom, though he himself disclaimed it, constant to the principles which he professed, of an eloquence worthy to deal with the mightiest subjects, scorning mere prettiness and verbal niceties, but expressing with infinite spirit the ideas which inspired it. I doubt not that he was endowed by divine providence with so pure a life and such power of speech, in order that our age might neither be without a model nor a reproach. Had some god wished to give all our wealth to Demetrius on the fixed condition that he should not be permitted to give it away, I am sure that he would have refused to accept it, and would have said, Chapter 9. I do not intend to fasten upon my back a burden like this, of which I never can rid myself, nor do I, nimble and lightly equipped as I am, mean to hinder my progress by plunging into deep morass of business transactions. Why do you offer to me what is the bane of our nations? I would not accept it, even if I meant to give it away, for I see many things which it would not become me to give. I should like to place before my eyes the things which fascinate both kings and peoples. I wish to behold the price of your blood and your lives. First bring before me the trophies of luxury, exhibiting them as you please, either in succession or, which is the better, in one mass. I shall see the shell of the tortoise, a foul and slothful brute, bought for immense sums and ornamented with the most elaborate care, the contrast of colors which is admired in it being obtained by the use of dyes resembling the natural tints. I see tables and pieces of wood valued at the price of a senator's estate, which are all the more precious the more knots the tree has been twisted into by disease. I see crystal vessels whose price is enhanced by their fragility, for among the ignorant the risk of losing things increase their value, instead of lowering it, as it ought. I see morine cups, for luxury would be too cheap if men did not drink to one another out of hollow gems the wine to be afterwards torn up again. I see more than one large pearl placed in each ear, for now our ears are trained to carry burdens. Pearls are hung from them in pairs, and each pair has other single ones fastened above it. This womanish folly is not exaggerated enough for the men of our time, unless they hung 2 or 3 estates upon each ear. I see ladies' silk dresses, if those deserve to be called dresses, which can neither cover their body or their shame, when wearing which they can scarcely with a good conscience swear that they are not naked. These are imported at a vast expense from nations unknown, even to trade, in order that our matrons may show as much of their persons in public as they do to their lovers in private. Chapter 10. What are you doing, avarice? See how many things there are whose prices exceeds that of your beloved gold. All those which I have mentioned are more highly esteemed and valued. I now wish to reveal your wealth, whose plates of gold and silver which dazzle our covetousness. By Hercules, the very earth, while she brings forth upon the surface everything that is of use to us, has buried these, sunk them deep, and rests upon them with her whole weight, regarding them as pernicious substances, and likely to prove the ruin of mankind if brought into the light of day. I see that iron is brought out of the same dark pits as gold and silver, in order that we may lack neither the means nor the reward of murder. Thus far we have dealt with actual substances, but some forms of wealth deceive our eyes and minds alike. I see there letters of credit, promissory notes, and bonds, empty phantoms of property, ghosts of sick avarice, with which she deceives our minds, which delight in unreal fancies. For what are these things, and what are interest and account books and usury, except the names of unnatural developments of human covetousness? I might complain of nature for not having hidden gold and silver deeper, for not having laid over it a weight too heavy to be removed. But what are your documents, your sale of time, your blood-sucking 12% interest? These are evils which we owe to our own will, which flow merely from our perverted habit, having nothing about them which can be seen or handled, mere dreams of empty avarice. Wretched is he who can take pleasure in the size of the audit book of his estate, in great tracts of land cultivated by slaves in chains, in huge flocks and herds, which require provinces and kingdoms for their pasture ground, in a household of servants, more in number than some of the most warlike nations, or in a private house whose extent surpasses that of a large city. After he has carefully reviewed all his wealth, in what it is invested and on what it is spent, and has rendered himself proud by the thoughts of it, let him compare what he has with what he wants. He becomes a poor man at once. Let me go, restore me to these riches of mine. I know the kingdom of wisdom, which is great and stable. I possessed everything, and in such a manner that it belongs to all men nevertheless. Chapter 11. When, therefore, Gaius Caesar offered him 200,000 sesterces, he laughingly refused it, thinking it unworthy of himself to boast of having refused so small a sum. Ye gods and goddesses, what a mean mind must the emperor have had, if he hoped either to honor or to corrupt him! I must here repeat a proof of his magnanimity. I have heard that when he was expressing his wonder at the folly of Gaius, at supposing that he could be influenced by such a bribe, he said, if he meant to tempt me, he ought to have tried to do so by offering his entire kingdom. Chapter 12. It is possible, then, to give something to the wise man, although all things belong to the wise man. Similarly, though we declare that friends have all things in common, it is nevertheless possible to give something to a friend, for I have not everything in common with a friend in the same manner as with a partner, where one part belongs to him, and another to me, but rather as a father and a mother possess their children in common when they have two, not each parent possessing one child, but each possessing both. First of all, I will prove that any chance would-be partner of mine has nothing in common with me. And why? Because this community of goods can only exist between wise men, who are alone capable of friendship. Other men can neither be friends nor partners one to another. In the next place, things may be owned in common in various ways. The knights' seats in the theatre belong to all the Roman knights. Yet of these, the seat which I occupy becomes my own, and if I yield it up to anyone, although I only yield him a thing which we own in common, still I appear to have given him something. Some things belong to certain persons under particular conditions. I have a place among the knights, not to sell or to let or to dwell in, but simply to see the spectacle from. Wherefore I do not tell an untruth when I say that I have a place among the knights' seats. Yet if, when I come into the theatre, the knights' seats are full, I both have a seat there by right, because I have the privilege of sitting there, and I have not a seat there, because my seat is occupied by those who share my right to those places. Suppose that the same thing takes place between friends. Whatever our friend possesses, it is common to us, but is the property of him who owns it. I cannot make use of it against his will. You are laughing at me, say you. If what belongs to my friend is mine, I am able to sell it. You are not able, for you are not able to sell your place among the knights' seats, and yet they are in common between you and the other knights. Consequently, the fact that you cannot sell a thing or consume it or exchange it for the better or the worse does not prove that it is not yours, for that which is yours under certain conditions is yours nevertheless. Chapter 13. I have received, but certainly not less. Not to detain you longer than is necessary. A benefit can be no more than a benefit, but the means employed to convey benefits may be both greater and more numerous. I mean those things by which kindness expresses and gives vent to itself, like lovers, whose many kisses and close embraces do not increase their love, but give it play. Chapter 14. The next question which arises has been thoroughly threshed out in the former books, so here it shall only be touched on shortly, for the arguments which have been used for other cases can be transferred to it. The question is, whether one who has done everything in his power to return a benefit has returned it. You may know, says our adversary, that he has not returned it, because he did everything in his power to return it. It is evident, therefore, that he did not do that which he did not have an opportunity of doing. A man who searches everywhere for his creditor without finding him does not thereby pay him what he owes. Some are in such a position that it is their duty to effect something material. In the case of others, to have done all in their power to effect it is as good as effecting it. If a physician has done all in his power to heal his patient, he has performed his duty. An advocate who employs his whole powers of eloquence on his client's behalf performs his duty, even though his client be convicted. The generalship, even of a beaten commander, is praised, if he has prudently, laboriously, and courageously exercised his functions. Your friend has done all in his power to return your kindness, but your good fortune stood in his way. No adversity befell you in which he could prove the truth of his friendship. He could not give you money when you were rich, or nurse you when you were in health, or help you when you were succeeding. Yet he repaid your kindness, even though you did not receive a benefit from him. Moreover, this man, being always eager and on the watch for an opportunity of doing this, as he has expended much anxiety and much trouble upon it, has really done more than he who quickly had an opportunity of repaying your kindness. The case of a debtor is not the same, for it is not enough for him to have tried to find the money unless he pays it. In his case, a harsh creditor stands over him who will not let a single day pass without charging him interest. In yours, there is a most kind friend who, seeing you busy, troubled, and anxious, would say, "Dismiss this trouble from thy breast. Leave off disturbing yourself. I have received from you all that I wish. You wrong me if you suppose that I want anything further. You have fully repaid me in intention." "Tell me," says our adversary, "if he had repaid the benefit, you would say that he had returned your kindness. Is then he who repays it in the same position as he who does not repay it? On the other hand, consider this. If he had forgotten the benefit which he had received, if he had not even attempted to be grateful, you would say that he had not returned the kindness. But this man has labored day and night to the neglect of all his other duties in his devoted care to let no opportunity of proving his gratitude escape him. Is then he who took no pains to return a kindness to be classed with this man who never ceased to take pains? You are unjust if you require a material payment from me when you see that I am not wanting in intention." Chapter 16. In short, suppose that when you are taken captive, I have borrowed money, made over my property as security to my creditor, that I have sailed in a stormy winter season along coasts swarming with pirates, that I have braved all the perils which necessarily attend a voyage, even on a peaceful sea, that I have wandered through all wilderness seeking for those men whom all others flee from, and that when I have at length reached the pirates, someone else has already ransomed you. Will you say that I have not returned your kindness? Even if during this voyage I have lost by shipwreck the money that I had raised to save you, even if I myself have fallen into the prison from which I sought to release you, will you say that I have not returned your kindness? No, by Hercules! The Athenians call Harmodius and Aristogiton tyrannicides. The hand of Mucius, which he left on the enemy's altar, was equivalent to the death of Porcina, and valor struggling against fortune is always illustrious, even if it falls short of accomplishing its design. He who watches each opportunity as it passes and tries to avail himself of one after another does more to show his gratitude than he whom the first opportunity enabled to be grateful without any trouble whatever. But, says our adversary, he gave you two things, material help and kindly feeling. You, therefore, owe him two. You might justly say this to one who returns your kindly feeling without troubling himself further. This man is really in your debt, but you cannot say so of one who wishes to repay you, who struggles and leaves no stone unturned to do so. For, as far as in him lies, he repays you in both kinds. In the next place, counting is not always a true test. Sometimes one thing is equivalent to two. Consequently, so intense and ardent a wish to repay takes the place of a material payment. Indeed, if a feeling of gratitude has no value in repaying a kindness without giving something material, then no one can be grateful to the gods, whom we can repay by gratitude alone. We cannot, says our adversary, give the gods anything else. Well, but if I am not able to give this man, whose kindness I am bound to return, anything beside my gratitude, why should that which is all that I can bestow on a god be insufficient to prove my gratitude towards a man? Chapter 16. If, however, you ask me what I really think, and wish me to give a definite answer, I should say that the one party ought to consider his benefit to have been returned, while the other ought to feel that he had not returned it. The one should release his friend from the debt, the other should hold himself bound to pay it. The one should say, I have received, the other should answer, I owe. In our whole investigation, we ought to look entirely to the public good. We ought to prevent the ungrateful having any excuses in which they can take refuge, and under cover of which they can disown their debts. I have done all in my power, say you. Well, keep on doing so still. Do you suppose that our ancestors were so foolish as not to understand that it is most unjust that a man who has wasted the money which he received from his creditor on debauchery or gambling should be classed with one who had lost his own property as well as that of others in a fire, by robbery, or some sadder mischance? They would take no excuse, that men might understand that they were always bound to keep their word. It was thought better that even a good excuse should not be accepted from a few persons, than that all men should be led to try to make excuses. You say that you have done all in your power to repay your debt. This ought to be enough for your friend, but not enough for you. He to whom you owe a kindness is unworthy of gratitude if he lets all your anxious care and trouble to repay it go for nothing. And so too, if your friend takes your goodwill as a repayment, you are ungrateful if you are not all the more eager to feel the obligation of the debt which he has forgiven you. Do not snap up his receipt, or call witnesses to prove it. Rather, seek opportunities for repaying not less than before. Repay the one man because he asks for repayment, the other because he forgives you your debt, the one because he is good, the other because he is bad. You need not, therefore, think that you have anything to do with the question whether a man be bound to repay the benefit which he has received from a wise man. If that man has ceased to be wise and has turned into a bad man, you would return a deposit which you had received from a wise man. You would return a loan even to a bad man. What grounds have you for not returning a benefit also? Because he had changed? Ought he to change you? What, if you had received anything from a man when healthy, would you not return it to him when he was sick? Though we always are more bound to treat our friends with more kindness when they are ailing, so too this man is sick in his mind. We ought to help him and bear with him. Folly is a disease of the mind. End of section 23. Book 7, chapters 8 to 16. Recorded by SKwanlada.
Section 24 of On Benefits. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathrine E. On Benefits by Seneca, translated by Aubrey Stewart. Book 7, chapters 17 to 32. 17. I think here we ought to make a distinction in order to render this point more intelligible. Benefits are of two kinds. One, the perfect and true benefit, which can only be bestowed by one wise man upon another. The other, the common vulgar form which ignorant men like ourselves interchange. With regard to the latter, there is no doubt that it is my duty to repay it whether my friend turns out to be a murderer, a thief, or an adulterer. Crimes have laws to punish them. Criminals are better reformed by judges than by ingratitude. A man ought not to make you bad by being so himself. I will fling a benefit back to a bad man. I will return it to a good man. I do so to the latter because I owe it to him, to the former that I may not be in his debt. 18. With regard to the other class of benefit, The question arises whether, if I was not able to take it without being a wise man, I am able to return it, except to a wise man. For suppose I do return it to him, he cannot receive it. He is not any longer able to receive such a thing. He has lost the knowledge of how to use it. You would not bid me throw back, i.e., in the game of a ball to a man who has lost his hand. It is folly to give any one what he cannot receive. If I am to begin to reply to the last argument, I say that I should not give him what he is unable to take, but I would return it, even though he is not able to receive it. I cannot lay him under an obligation unless he takes my bounty, but by returning it I can free myself from my obligations to him. You say, he will not be able to use it. Let him see to that. The fault will lie with him, not with me. 19. To return a thing, says our adversary, is to hand it over to one who can receive it. Why, if you owed some wine to any man, and he bade you pour it into a net or a sieve, would you say that you had returned it? Or would you be willing to return it in such a way that in the act of returning it was lost between you? To return is to give that which you owe back to its owner, when he wishes for it. It is not my duty to perform more than this. That he should possess what he has received from me is a matter for further consideration. I do not owe him the safe keeping of his property, but the honourable payment of my debt, and it is much better that he should not have it than that I should not return it to him. I would repay my creditor, even though he would at once take what I paid him to the market. Even if he deputed an adulteress to receive the money from me, I would pay it to her. Even if he were to pour the coins which he receives into a loose fold of his cloak, I would pay it. It is my business to return it to him, not to keep it and save it for him after I have returned it. I am bound to take care of his bounty when I have received it, but not when I have returned it to him. While it remains with me, it must be kept safe, but when he asks for it again, I must give it to him, even though it slips out of his hands as he takes it. I will repay a good man when it is convenient. I will repay a bad man when he asks me to do so. You cannot, argues our adversary, return him a benefit of the same kind as that which you received, for you received it from a wise man, and you are returning it to a fool. Do I not return to him such a benefit as he is now able to receive? It is not my fault if I return it to him worse than I received it. The fault lies with him, and so, unless he regains his former wisdom, I shall return it in such a form as he, in his fallen condition, is able to receive. But what, asks he, if he become not only bad, but savage and ferocious, like Apollodorus or Phalaris? Would you return even to such a man as this a benefit which you had received from him? I answer, nature does not admit of so great a change in a wise man. Men do not change from the best to the worst. Even in becoming bad, he would necessarily retain some traces of goodness. Virtue is never so utterly quenched as not to imprint on the mind marks which no degradation can efface. If wild animals bred in captivity escape into the woods, they still retain something of their original tameness, and are as remote from the gentlest in the one extreme as they are in the other from those which have always been wild, and have never endured to be touched by man's hand. No one who has ever applied himself to philosophy ever becomes completely wicked. His mind becomes so deeply coloured with it that its tints can never be entirely spoiled and blackened. In the next place, I ask whether this man of yours be ferocious merely in intent, or whether he breaks out into actual outrages upon mankind. You have instanced the tyrants Apollodorus and Phalaris. If the bad man restrains their evil likeness within himself, why should I not return his benefit to him, in order to set myself free from any further dealings with him? If, however, he not only delights in human blood, but feeds upon it, If he exercises his insatiable cruelty in the torture of persons of all ages, and his fury is not prompted by anger, but by a sort of delight in cruelty, if he cuts the throats of children before the eyes of their parents, if, not satisfied with merely killing his victims, he tortures them, and not only burns but actually roasts them, if his castle is always wet with freshly shed blood, then it is not enough not to return his benefits. All connection between me and such a man has been broken off by his destruction of the bonds of human society. If he had bestowed something upon me, but were to invade my native country, he would have lost all claim to my gratitude, and it would be counted a crime to make him any return. If he does not attack my country, but is a scourge of his own, if he has nothing to do with my nation, but torments and cuts to pieces his own, then in the same manner such depravity, though it does not render him my personal enemy, yet renders him hateful to me, and the duty which I owe to the human race is anterior to and more important than that which I owe to him as an individual. 20. However, although this be so, and although I am freed from all obligation towards him, from the moment when, by outraging all laws, he rendered it impossible for any man to do him a wrong, nevertheless, I think I ought to make the following distinction in dealing with him. If my repayment of his benefit will neither increase nor maintain his powers of doing mischief to mankind, and is of such a character that I can return it to him without disadvantage to the public, I would return it. For instance, I would save the life of his infant child, for what harm can this benefit do to any of those who suffer from his cruelty? But I would not furnish him with money to pay his bodyguard. If he wishes for marbles or fine clothes, the trappings of his luxury will harm no one, but with soldiers and arms I would not furnish him. If he demands, as a great boon, actors and courtesans and such things as will soften his savage nature, I would willingly bestow them upon him. I would not furnish him with triremes and brass-beaked ships of war, but I would send him fast sailing in luxuriously fitted vessels, and all the toys of kings who take their pleasure on the sea. If his health was altogether despaired of, I would by the same act bestow a benefit on all men and return one to him, seeing that for such characters death is the only remedy, and that he who never will return to himself had best leave himself. However, such wickedness as this is uncommon, and is always regarded as a portent, as when the earth opens, or when fire breaks forth from caves under the sea. So let us leave it, and speak of those vices which we can hate without shuddering at them. As for the ordinary bad man, whom I can find in the marketplace of any town, who is feared only by individuals, I would return to him a benefit which I had received from him. It is not right that I should profit by his wickedness. Let me return what is not mine to its owner. Whether he be good or bad makes no difference, but I would consider the matter most carefully, if I were not returning, but bestowing it. 21. This point requires to be illustrated by a story. A certain Pythagorean bought a fine pair of shoes from a shoemaker, and as they were an expensive piece of work, he did not pay ready money for them. Some time afterward he came to the shop to pay for them, and after he had long been knocking at the closed door, someone said to him, "Why do you waste your time? The shoemaker whom you seek has been carried out of his house and buried. This is a grief to us who lose our friends forever, but by no means so to you, who know that he will be born again," jeering at the Pythagorean. Upon this our philosopher not unwillingly carried his 3 or 4 denarii home again, shaking them every now and then. Afterwards, blaming himself for the pleasure which he had secretly felt at not paying his debt, and perceiving that he enjoyed having made this trifling again, he returned to the shop, and saying, "The man lives for you, pay him what you owe," he passed 4 denarii into the shop through the crack of the closed door, and let them fall inside, punishing himself for his unconscionable greediness, that he might not form the habit of appropriating that which is not his own. 22. If you owe anything, seek for someone to whom you may repay it, and if no one demands it, done your own self. Whether the man be good or bad is no concern of yours. Repay him, and then blame him. You have forgotten how your several duties are divided. It is right for him to forget it, but we have bidden you bear it in mind. When, however, we say that he who bestows a benefit ought to forget it, it is a mistake to suppose that we rob him of all recollection of the business, though it is most creditable to him. Some of our precepts are stated over, strictly in order to reduce them to their true proportions. When we say that he ought not to remember it, we mean he ought not to speak publicly, or boast of it offensively. There are some who, when they have bestowed a benefit, tell it in all societies, talk of it when sober, cannot be silent about it when drunk, force it upon strangers, and communicate it to friends. It is to quell this excessive and reproachful consciousness that we bid him who gave it forget it, and by commanding him to do this, which is more than he is able, encourage him to keep silence. 23. When you distrust those whom you order to do anything, you ought to command them to do more than enough, in order that they may do what is enough. The purpose of all exaggeration is to arrive at the truth by falsehood. Consequently, he who spoke of horses as being whiter than snows and swifter than the winds, said what could not possibly be, in order that they might be thought to be as much so as possible. And he who said, more firm than crags, more headlong than the stream, did not suppose that he should make any one believe that a man could ever be as firm as a crag. Exaggeration never hopes all its daring flights to be believed, but affirms what is incredible, and thereby it may convey what is credible. When we say, let the man who has bestowed a benefit forget it, what we mean is, let him be as though he had forgotten it. Let not his remembrance of it appear or be seen. When we say that repayment of a benefit ought not to be demanded, we do not utterly forbid its being demanded. For repayment must often be extorted from bad men, and even good men require to be reminded of it. Am I not to point out the means of repayment to one who does not perceive it? Am I not to explain my wants to one who does not know them? Why should he, if a bad man, have the excuse, or, if a good man, have the sorrow of not knowing them? Men ought sometimes to be reminded of their debts, though with modesty, not in the tone of one demanding a legal right. 24. Socrates once said in the hearing of his friends, I would have bought a cloak if I had had the money for it. He asked no one for money, but he reminded them all to give it. There was a rivalry between them as to who should give it, and how should there not be? Was it not a small thing which Socrates received? Yes, but it was a great thing to be the man from whom Socrates received it. Could he blame them more gently? I would, said he, have bought a cloak if I had had the money for it. After this, however eager anyone was to give, he gave too late, for he had already been wanting in his duty to Socrates. Because some men harshly demand repayment of debts, we forbid it, not in order that they may never be done, but that they may be done sparingly. 25. Aristippus once, when enjoying a perfume, said, Bad luck to those effeminate persons who have brought so nice a thing into disrepute. We also may say, Bad luck to those base extortioners who pester us for a fourfold return on their benefits, and have brought into disrepute so nice a thing as reminding our friends of their duty. I shall nevertheless make use of this right of friendship, and I shall demand the return of a benefit from any man from whom I would not have scrupled to ask for one, such a man as would regard the power of returning a benefit as equivalent to receiving a second one. Never, not even when complaining of him, would I say, A wretch forlorn upon the shore he lay, his ship, his comrades, all were swept away. Fool that I was, I pitied his despair, and even gave him of my realm a share. This is not to remind, but to reproach. This is to make one's benefits odious, to enable him, or even to make him wish to be ungrateful. It is enough, and more than enough, to remind him of it gently and familiarly. If aught of mine hath e'er deserved thy thanks. To this his answer would be, Of course you have deserved my thanks. You took me up, a wretch forlorn upon the shore. 26. But, says our adversary, suppose that we gain nothing by this. Suppose that he pretends that he has forgotten it. What ought I to do? You now ask a very necessary question, and one which fitly concludes this branch of the subject, how, namely, one ought to bear with the ungrateful. I answer, calmly, gently, magnanimously. Never let any one's discourtesy, forgetfulness, or ingratitude enrage you so much that you do not feel any pleasure at having bestowed a benefit upon him. Never let your wrongs drive you into saying, I wish I had not done it. You ought to take pleasure even in the ill success of your benefit. He will always be sorry for it, even though you are not even now sorry for it. You ought not to be indignant, as if something strange had happened. You ought rather to be surprised if it had not happened. Some are prevented by difficulties, some by expense, and some by danger from returning your bounty. Some are hindered by a false shame, because by returning it they would confess that they had received it. With others, ignorance of their duty, indolence, or excess of business stands in the way. Reflect upon the insatiability of men's desires. You need not be surprised if no one repays you in a world in which no one ever gains enough. What man is there of so firm and trustworthy a mind that you can safely invest your benefits in him? One man is crazed with lust, another is the slave of his belly, another gives his whole soul to gain, caring nothing for the means by which he amasses it. Some men's minds are disturbed by envy, some blinded by ambition till they are ready to fling themselves on the sword's point. In addition to this, one must reckon sluggishness of mind and old age, and also the opposites of these, restlessness and disturbance of mind, also excessive self-esteem and pride in the very things for which a man ought to be despised. I need not mention obstinate persistence in wrong-doing, or frivolity which cannot remain constant to one point. Besides all this, there is headlong rashness, there is timidity which never gives us trustworthy counsel, and the numberless errors with which we struggle, the rashness of the most cowardly, the quarrels of our best friends, and the most common evil of trusting in what is most uncertain, and of undervaluing, when we have obtained it, that which we once never hoped to possess. Amidst all these restless passions, how can you hope to find a thing so full of rest as good faith? 27. If a true picture of our life were to rise before your mental vision, you would, I think, behold a scene like that of a town just taken by storm, where decency and righteousness were no longer regarded, and no advice is heard but that of force, as if universal confusion were the word of command. Neither fire nor sword are spared, crime is unpunished by the laws. Even religion, which saves the lives of suppliants in the very midst of armed enemies, does not check those who are rushing to secure plunder. Some men rob private houses, some public buildings. All places, sacred or profane, are alike stripped. Some burst their way in, others climb over. Some open a wider path for themselves by overthrowing the walls that keep them out, and make their way to their booty over ruins. Some ravage without murdering, others brandish spoils dripping with their owner's blood. Every one carries off his neighbor's goods. In this greedy struggle of the human race, surely you forget the common lot of all mankind, if you seek among these robbers for one who will return what he has got. If you are indignant at men being ungrateful, you ought also to be indignant at their being luxurious, avaricious, and lustful, You might as well be indignant with sick men for being ugly, or with old men for being pale. It is indeed a serious vice, it is not to be borne, and sets men at variance with one another. Nay, it rends and destroys that union by which alone our human weakness can be supported, yet it is so absolutely universal that even those who complain of it most are not themselves free from it. 28. Consider within yourself whether you have always shown gratitude to those to whom you owe it, whether no one's kindness has ever been wasted upon you, whether you constantly bear in mind all the benefits which you have received. You will find that those which you received as a boy were forgotten before you became a man, that those bestowed upon you as a young man slipped from your memory when you became an old one. Some we have lost, some we have thrown away, some have by degrees passed out of sight, to some we have willfully shut our eyes. If I am to make excuses for your weakness, I must say in the first place that human memory is a frail vessel and is not large enough to contain the mass of things placed in it. The more it receives, the more it must necessarily lose. The oldest things in it give way to the newest. Thus it comes to pass that your nurse has hardly any influence with you, because the lapse of time has set the kindness which you received from her at so great a distance. Thus it is that you no longer look upon your teacher with respect, and that now when you are busy about your candidature for the consulate or the priesthood, you forget those who supported you in your election to the quaestorship. If you carefully examine yourself, perhaps you will find the vice of which you complain in your own bosom. You are wrong in being angry with the universal failing, and foolish also, for it is your own as well. You must pardon others, that you may yourself be acquitted. You will make your friend a better man by bearing with him. You will in all cases make him a worse one by reproaching him. You can have no reason for rendering him shameless. Let him preserve any remnants of modesty which he may have. Too loud reproaches have often dispelled a modesty which might have borne good fruit. No man fears to be that which all men see that he is. When his fault is made public, he loses his sense of shame. 29. You say, I have lost the benefit which I bestowed. Yet do we say that we have lost what we consecrate to heaven, and a benefit well bestowed, even though we get an ill return for it, is to be reckoned among things consecrated. Our friend is not such a man as we hoped he was, still let us, unlike him, remain the same as we were. The loss did not take place when he proved himself so. His ingratitude cannot be made public without reflecting some shame upon us, since to complain of the loss of a benefit is a sign that it was not well bestowed. As far as we are able, we ought to plead with ourselves on his behalf. Perhaps he was not able to return it. Perhaps he did not know of it. Perhaps he will still do it. A wise and forbearing creditor prevents the loss of some debts by encouraging his debtor and giving him time. We ought to do the same. We ought to deal tenderly with a weakly sense of honor. 30. I have lost, you say, the benefit which I bestowed. You are a fool, and do not understand when your loss took place. You have indeed lost it, but you did so when you gave it. The fact has only now come to light. Even in the case of those benefits which appear to be lost, gentleness will do much good. The wounds of the mind ought to be handled as tenderly as those of the body. The string, which might be disentangled by patience, is often broken by a rough pull. What is the use of abuse or of complaints? Why do you overwhelm him with reproaches? Why do you set him free from his obligation? Even if he be ungrateful, he owes you nothing after this. What sense is there in exasperating a man on whom you have conferred great favours, so as out of a doubtful friend to make a certain enemy, and one too who will seek to support his own cause by defaming you, or to make men say, I do not know what the reason is that he cannot endure a man to whom he owes so much. There must be something in the background. Any man can asperse, even if he does not permanently stain the reputation of his betters by complaining of them, nor will any one be satisfied with imputing small crimes to them, when it is only by the enormity of his falsehood that he can hope to be believed. 31. What a much better way is that by which the semblance of friendship, and, indeed, if the other regains to his right mind, friendship itself is preserved. Bad men are overcome by unwearying goodness, nor does any one receive kindness in so harsh and hostile a spirit as not to love good men, even while he does them wrong, when they lay him under the additional obligation of requiring no return for their kindness. Reflect, then, upon this. You say, my kindness has met with no return. What am I to do? I ought to imitate the gods, those noblest disposers of all events, who begin to bestow their benefits on those who know them not, and persist in bestowing them on those who are ungrateful for them. Some reproach them with neglect of us, some with injustice towards us. Others place them outside of their own world, in sloth and indifference, without light, and without any functions. Others declare that the sun itself, to whom we owe the division of our times of labor and of rest, by whose means we are saved from being plunged in the darkness of eternal night, who, by his circuit, orders the seasons of the year, gives strength to our bodies, brings forth our crops and ripens our fruits, is merely a mass of stone, or a fortuitous collection of fiery particles, or anything rather than a god. Yet, nevertheless, like the kindest of parents, who only smile at the spiteful words of their children, the gods do not cease to heap benefits upon those who doubt from what source their benefits are derived, but continue impartially distributing their bounty among all the peoples and nations of the earth. Possessing only the power of doing good, they moisten the land with seasonable showers, they put the seas in movement by the winds, they make time by the course of the constellations, they temper the extremes of heat and cold, of summer and winter, by breathing a milder air upon us, and they graciously and serenely bear with the faults of our erring spirits. Let us follow their example. Let us give, even if much be given to no purpose. Let us, in spite of this, give to others, nay, even to those upon whom our bounty has been wasted. No one is prevented by the fall of a house from building another. When one home has been destroyed by fire, we lay the foundations of another before the site has had time to cool. We rebuild ruined cities more than once upon the same spots, so untiring are our hopes of success. Men would undertake no works either on land or sea, if they were not willing to try again what they have failed in once. 32. Suppose a man is ungrateful, he does not injure me, but himself. I had the enjoyment of my benefit when I bestowed it upon him. Because he is ungrateful, I shall not be slower to give, but more careful. What I have lost with him, I shall receive back from others. But I will bestow a second benefit upon this man himself, and will overcome him, even as a good husbandman overcomes the sterility of the soil by care and culture. If I do not do so, my benefit is lost to me, and he is lost to mankind. It is no proof of a great mind to give and to throw away one's bounty. The true test of a great mind is to throw away one's bounty and still to give. End of section 24. End of On Benefits by Seneca. Translated by Aubrey Stewart.